that was going to be such an important part of my job, but it certainly is a really important part of my job, given the quick change we've seen in our landscape here in Southern Oregon. I'll give you a relatively quick presentation, mostly show you lots of pictures and tell you some observations that I've had, and then hopefully have lots of time for a question and answer at the end. So hemp in the Rogue Valley. First question is, what is hemp? Here are pictures on the left and right. Which one of those is hemp and which is marijuana? Votes, the plant on the left is a hemp plant. Anybody raise a hand, have a guess? What do you think there in the back?
Hemp's on the left.
Hemp's on the left. That's accurate. Hemp is also on the right. They're both hemp plants. There is no visual distinguishing characteristic. When you're just looking at the plant itself, there is no way to tell if it's a hemp plant or if it's a marijuana plant. They are the same genus and species. They are the same plant. The difference is a sort of an academic or a political one, where Oregon and the federal government, in slightly different ways, have set a threshold about this one compound called THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. It is the compound in marijuana that gets people stoned, has sort of the psychoactive effect, and they've drawn a line in Oregon at 0.3% delta 9 THC. And so it's a relatively small fraction. If you were going to go to the dispensary and buy a joint, it would probably have 15 or 20% of this THC, and so 0.3 is a pretty small fraction of that. And so on these cannabis plants can live somewhere on this continuum from close to 0 up to tens of percents of THC, and the threshold that Oregon has drawn is 0.3% THC. That is the only distinguishing factor between a hemp plant and a marijuana plant. They are the same beast otherwise. And so looking at a plant, you can't tell. Driving down the road, you might be able to look at a field, and if it's an open field that's larger than an acre, it's going to be hemp. If it's marijuana, it has to be smaller than an acre. It's going to have a fence around it, a wooden fence usually, and some security cameras. And so you can sort of tell driving down the road, but if you were just someone were to hand you a marijuana plant or a hemp plant, you could look at them, you could smell them, you could taste them, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Yes. Can everyone see now? Sorry about that. And so I'm only allowed to work on the hemp side of this equation, that marijuana is still federally illegal, and since Oregon State University, my employer, takes money from various federal organizations, that money comes with a stipulation that says you can't work on these on sort of illicit drugs. And so it's just been since January of 2019, just more than a year, that the university has allowed us to do anything related to hemp. I couldn't come give you this talk a year and a half ago because hemp was still federally illegal at that stage. And so I work in the sort of low THC side of things with registered hemp growers and not with marijuana growers. And hemp is a relatively new crop to Oregon, and hemp as we know it is a new crop sort of to the world. That I have a challenge that if you can bring me in some funny grass plant or ask me a question about pears or some weed that grows in your lawn, and I can go to the university library, and chances are people have been studying whatever that thing is for a century or a century and a half. And I can go and find some paper from California or Pennsylvania or Europe that will tell me a little bit about how to control that weed or how you grow a good crop of pears. We don't have that for hemp because it's been federally illegal since about the 1930s, both marijuana and hemp to grow. And so we really have this sort of dearth of information, particularly on hemp that's being grown for CBD, cannabidiol, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a slide. And so have this lack of good scientific information, which is what we do at the Extension Service. We extend that science from the universities out into the rural communities. We can go back and find some things. This is a publication from back when it was Oregon State College, before it was Oregon State University, can't quite read that, but that was published in May of 1898, and is a experimental bulletin, and they are talking about feeding artichokes and pumpkins to pigs, and rations for dairy cows, but they also have notes on hemp and flax. And so there was a time when hemp was an important crop, including here in Oregon, grown for fiber, for rope and for textiles, grown for seed, which can be extracted for oil or a protein source for livestock, but is no longer. And so we sort of had this challenge of a really long gap in what are the best practices, what are the consequences of growing this, how can we make best recommendations so that we're, if folks are gonna grow hemp, they can do that in a way that is environmentally conscious and productive and sort of safe for everyone involved. And so just a little bit of backing up on hemp in general. There are a really wide breadth of uses for hemp. Things like the seed can be harvested and used for sort of a salad oil. It's like a reasonably high quality oil that you would dress your salad in. The meal that's left over after the oil is extracted is reasonably high in protein, could feed that to livestock. Can go to the grocery store, I think, and buy hemp milk, or buy hemp seeds or granola that has hemp in it. So lots of uses for the seeds. There's also the fiber. It's as I mentioned, desirable for rope, particularly in like maritime situations. It's a really durable rope in salt water compared to flax or cotton or some other kind of natural fiber. The fiber can also be used to make sort of cloth. You can go buy a shirt that's made out of hemp fabric, and there are lots of interesting sort of avenues in potentially like building construction, using it as a component of either like laminated construction, like wood-like construction materials, can be used as an additive to strengthen concrete. So a range of uses of the fiber of hemp. And then we also have a hemp flour down here and sort of whole hemp biomass. The flour is generally sort of harvested and sort of taken to a dispensary where somebody might want to buy a bud of flour to smoke for medicinal purposes. And the whole plant biomass can be chopped up, and that those medicinal compounds, the CBD, cannabidiol, can then be extracted from that biomass to provide sort of pure CBD oil that would then go into some sort of edible, consumable medicinal product like a gummy or a brownie or something. And so globally there has, and that publication I was referring to from the 1890s was really thinking about seeds from hemp and fiber from hemp, and the Canadians have been growing fiber hemp for a number of years, and so have the Europeans. But the world we live in Southern Oregon is one that is flour and is biomass for that extractable oil. This past year was primarily CBD, but there are a whole chain of cannabinoids, which CBD and THC are one of. We'll find more growers this year growing it for CBG. There's also CBC, CBDA, CBN, that are all purported to have sort of slightly different medicinal qualities. I say purported because these things have not been studied very well and haven't been validated in most cases to the level that sort of pharmaceuticals generally would be validated. But there'll be more of these compounds to come, where CBD has been the hot one that we've heard about recently. And so Oregon legalized the production of hemp and started collecting data in 2015. And these are acres across the whole state. And this is registered acres, and so we see that there were just a few hundred acres grown in 2016 and 2017, a few thousand acres grown in 2018, and then at the end of 2018, there was a federal farm bill passed that legalized the production of hemp, and we see this explosion in growth. Somewhere on the order of 64,000 acres were registered to be planted across the state of Oregon. So you have to apply for a license from the Department of Agriculture in Salem in order to grow hemp, and these are registered acres. Don't know exactly how many were planted of those registered acres. But this is like quite an exponential growth function. I went and modeled this out and drew the curve on it and predicted out one more year. While I don't think this is going to happen, if you continue to draw the line out there, it would be on the order of like 180,000 acres in Oregon next year. I put money on us not seeing 180,000 acres, but it is sort of a hot question of what will happen next year. I asked the Department of Agriculture through their like sort of public information effort if I could have the locations of all of the hemp fields and the acres of all the hemp fields in the state, and they provided that, and I put it into some mapping software and generated this map where colors are the number of acres within a county, where yellow is relatively low acreage and dark purple or dark blue is on the order of 8,000 or 9,000 acres, and each little white dot is the latitude and longitude of one hemp field. And so you can see that where our little corner of the world here is highlighted in dark purple. I think that there were on the order of 9,000 acres of hemp grown in Jackson County and another 3,000 or 4,000 acres grown in Josephine. We certainly are the hot spot in the state, and I'm suspicious that last year, at least in terms of these registered acres, may well have been a hot spot in the country, but I don't know of. It would either probably be Colorado, and I don't know if they have quite the concentration and density of hemp that we saw here last year. And so it is both a timely and relevant topic to a change in land use that I think you've all observed just doing your routine things in your life. And so now I'm going to take you on a little bit of a sort of a tour of just some pictures and things that I've observed through hemp fields and challenges I see with the production system that's currently being used. Am I going till 11, or am I stopping before 11? Tell me what time I should stop.
About, I'd say, into the 30 minutes.
Yeah, easy. I got a clock here, and I can like spiel on about this for a while, and I want to make sure I'm respectful of the rest of your agenda. So, onto some pictures. We see a production system here in Southern Oregon that is primarily plants that have been started in a greenhouse, either from seed or from cuttings, where they're cloning a mother plant, that are then propagated out in a greenhouse, and then are transplanted out into open fields. There aren't any herbicides or good weed control or chemical weed control strategies that can be legally used on hemp. And so weed control has to come in some other form. And that could be a cultivator attached to a tractor. It could be people out in the fields with hoes, hoeing weeds. A lot of, or most of the hemp growers in our part of the world have adopted what's called plasticulture or plastic mulch. And so they've bedded up the field using a tractor-based implement, laid down a sheet of very thin, reasonably low-grade plastic. They've laid a piece of drip irrigation tape underneath that plastic, and then come through, pop holes in the plastic, and plant those transplants that came from the greenhouse into the soil right near that irrigation line, and are able to achieve reasonably good weed control doing that. And this is a system that you would see an organic vegetable garden using, or somebody growing tomatoes in California. That it's not, using plastic mulch for weed control isn't new to agriculture, but certainly the acreage of that plastic mulch that we've seen here in Southern Oregon compared to historic agricultural land uses and weed control strategies has skyrocketed dramatically. And I guess as I answer the phone, both from hemp growers and from people neighboring hemp fields, I get plenty of questions about the plastic, and so spent some time trying to understand the dynamic there. If we look at one field, this is off of West Main Street, and I don't know quite how many acres this is, but I'm doing a little bit of sort of back of the napkin math. To put down plastic, just the sheet plastic, not the irrigation, would be on the order of 100 or 200 pounds of plastic per acre that would go down. And the challenge with this is that there's not really any disposal method. It's a one-year kind of thing. It's light enough weight that it'll get holes in it pretty quickly. You could just put your finger through it. And so it needs to be removed from the field after each growing season and then disposed of. it starts out as like really pretty low-grade plastic to start with, and so isn't tremendously desirable in the recycling market, and then has this real challenge of, as you pull it back out of the field, quite a bit of soil will cling to it, and so there can be an equal weight of soil and plastic. And if you wanted to recycle that, that would take a recycler washing all the plastic and using an incredible amount of water to then end up with a reasonably small amount of low-grade plastic to want to recycle. And so there is not any recycling solution for this. It goes into landfills and is a sort of consequence of this type of production system. This is not the only way that hemp could be grown, but is the way that hemp is being grown. And I guess I'll sort of tell you my little aside, and this is an assessment and not a personal assessment and not one that is written down anywhere. My sense is that as folks saw that hemp was legalized and that they felt like there was going to be this really valuable market for CBD oil and flowers, that they needed to figure out how to scale up production. And since it's been illegal, there aren't really any experts in hemp production to go to. And so my sense is the folks who got involved in this were the ones who were growing marijuana in their basement, in their backyard, in the woods of Humboldt County. That was a system of, I've got relatively few plants, and each of those plants is really valuable. I've got to baby each one in order to make a good profit. And so have then taken that system where the transplants are carefully managed, that they're gone into a pretty costly production system where to be able to transplant into this plastic and use the irrigation as it's used is a really very expensive production system, but I think comes from that marijuana model. Whereas if we had asked an Iowa corn farmer how he or she would grow hemp, I bet they would take their corn planter and put seeds directly into the ground. They would irrigate it overhead, probably wouldn't use the plastic mulch, would use cultivation, and would have lots more plants per acre, would have a lot less money per plant, but would probably also make less money per plant, but would do it in a more cost-effective way. Where if you want to grow 10 acres of a crop, this kind of system of the transplant from the greenhouse, plastic mulch, drip irrigation, is it's about the most expensive way that you can grow a crop outdoors. And I don't know that it needs to be that way, but it has happened that way. And I think a challenge of that is that lots of the folks who are involved in hemp production are both new to Southern Oregon and new to agriculture. In many cases, we haven't grown that many sort of like extensive kind of field crops in Southern Oregon. It's mostly been tree fruit and sort of livestock, alfalfa kind of system. And so we see some concerns with that sort of transition to that kind of production system. We see lots of like sort of hillsides. This is in the Dark Hollow part of the world where I do a little bit of like a cringe when people will plow up a hillside, because I know that the soil that is on that hill has taken millennia to form there and can wash away in a single season. And I would have thought that people would have learned from like the Dust Bowl in the 1930s that soil erosion is a major concern, and that we need to adopt practices to prevent soil from moving off of our fields in the off season. This field is out in the Applegate, and so here they've plowed a hillside